Hey everybody, it's Mr. Hand, and this week we're looking at the circulatory system. So hopefully by the end of this lesson, you'll know basically what the parts of the circulatory system are, how they work, and what their role is. And I found this quote, and I think it's kind of interesting. In particular, I like towards the end here where it says, if just one system, such as the cardiovascular system, shuts down, death will always follow. So in the human body, we have these 11 organ systems, but if one system fails, all the others are going to fail too. That is, we can't really live without those organ systems. So a circulatory system is probably one of the simplest ones in terms of the number of parts. It's made of the heart, the blood that runs through the heart, and through the blood vessels. Those are the three main parts of the circulatory system. So even though it's got these three simple parts, it actually reaches every corner of your body. Blood has to be able to get to every corner of your body to bring the nutrients, bring the oxygen, keep those cells alive, because those cells can't do it for themselves. So again, there's four main responsibilities for the circulatory system. One is transporting the nutrients and oxygen that your cells need. Okay. Without nutrients and oxygen, those cells are going to die quickly. So, for instance, when people have heart attacks or they have strokes, for instance, blood, or they have blood clot, blood is getting blocked in arteries or veins or capillaries, and it's not getting through to those cells. It's not long after where those cells will start to die. So, for instance, when someone has a stroke, blood can't get to the brain, and so those nutrients, that oxygen, can't get to those cells in the brain, and the wastes that accumulate there, like the carbon dioxide and other such wastes, are harmful to the cells. It also can't get out. Okay, so the blood sort of does two things. It's transporting the good stuff to the cells that it needs and getting rid of the bad stuff. Okay. The other thing that your blood can do is it's a transport system for chemical messages. So your brain sends chemical messages out to the body, okay, to adjust things, to change growth rates, things like that. And then finally, you can also use your circulatory system to maintain your body temperature. You may notice this like on a cold day. If you're standing around doing nothing outside on a cold day, you're going to get cold really quickly. But if you are actively moving around, your body will start to generate heat, and then your circulatory system will pick up in response to that to keep bringing those cells nutrients, bringing them oxygen so that they can keep generating heat, and then you can actually use your circulatory system to redistribute that heat within the body. So at the core of the circulatory system is the heart. So there's a picture of our heart here, okay? And the heart has four main parts, the right atrium, the left atrium, okay? Those are like the upstairs chambers, and the right ventricle and the left ventricle. Those are like the downstairs chambers of the heart, and you'll see in the videos this week how those chambers open and close, pump in order to send blood out to the body. So, the circulatory system, like I said before, sort of touches all parts of your body. So if we kind of zoom in on my picture here, okay, there's our heart, and we can see deoxygenated blood, so blood coming back in from the body, coming in from here and from the lower body, okay, and it is going into the left side of the heart, left side of our diagram. It would be the right side of your heart if you were facing outwards, okay, and being brought into the top, through the valve, and then pumped out using pressure to the lungs. So here's our lungs. In our lungs, we have these capillaries, so the blood comes in, okay? And while it's in your lungs, moving through these capillaries, it picks up oxygen. So oxygen's kind of diffusing in through these capillaries, mixing in with the blood, okay, through diffusion, and then it's coming back down to the heart, okay? At the same time, okay, carbon dioxide is leaving through those capillaries in the lungs, and then you breathe it out through your mouth and your nose. Okay, let's continue to follow the blood. So the blood comes down, back into the heart, okay, in through the top, through that valve, and it gets pumped again out to the body, okay? Some of it ends up in places in your upper body, okay? Some of it ends up going through your liver, okay? Some of it ends up making its way down to the lower part of the body. Okay, some of it goes to the stomach and the intestines. And what it's doing there, same thing as it's making it pass through the stomach and intestines. Okay, if we can imagine your intestines here and there's food there, it's picking up food nutrients. Okay, so the nutrients in your digestive system, it's picking that up and then using that as sort of a delivery method for the rest of your body. Okay, it also makes a quick pass by your kidneys as well. So some blood's going to go down through your kidneys. That's where there's going to be a little bit of cleaning of the blood, so to say, where it's going to take out some of those waste products, okay, and get it sort of prepared to become urine, and then the rest of your lower body. And what we'll notice is this is a closed circuit, so all that blood, okay, is going through these arteries on its way back out to the rest of the body. It goes into the capillaries. In the capillaries, it's going to exchange nutrients, okay, exchange waste, pick up waste, drop off nutrients, and then it's going to make its way back up towards the heart again, okay. So it's going to go back into the heart, and then the whole process starts again. So it goes in the heart, it gets pumped around to the lungs, from the lungs back out to the body. That's the circulatory system in a nutshell. And it's made up of these three main parts. The arteries, which bring the blood with oxygen-rich blood to the rest of the body. The veins, which bring the oxygen-depleted blood back to the heart and then out to the lungs. And then these capillaries where this exchange happens. So in the capillaries, that's where you get this exchange happening. They're very thin-celled, one cell sort of thick vessels that allow for this diffusion across their membranes. So the blood is pushed through the body by this constant contracting and relaxing of the heart. So if we zoom in on the heart, it's a muscle. Okay, that muscle is constantly contracting and expanding in order to pump that blood. Okay, and it never stops. And if it does stop, that's when we start to run into problems. So inside the heart and also inside the vessels, we'll see oftentimes these valves. They are sort of these flexible flaps of tissue, and what they do is they allow blood to only flow in one direction. So as the blood kind of gets pumped around, it goes through here, it comes up into here, okay, and then out through that gate there, through those flaps. Those flaps then close, and they don't allow the heart. They don't allow the blood to flow backwards. So when the heart is pushing, okay, the blood gets pushed through, okay. Then when the heart is contracted and then it goes to expand again, the valve shuts, the blood doesn't flow backwards. And the big thing that's going on here for life is that oxygen and carbon dioxide are flowing into and out of these capillaries, and it happens through this natural process called diffusion. So you've probably seen diffusion before. Like if you put a drop of food coloring in a glass of water, okay, at first it's going to look very concentrated. It's going to be all in one spot. It'll be really dark. If you were to come back 5 minutes later, those molecules or those atoms will have dispersed, okay, and it'll be diffused out into the solution, and it'll be less concentrated but more spread out. That's diffusion. So diffusion is this sort of natural process of things moving from higher concentration to lower concentration. If blood has more oxygen than the tissues, then the oxygen will diffuse across into the capillary walls and then enter the tissues. Carbon dioxide is going to do the exact opposite. So if your tissue had built up carbon dioxide, you're going to need to remove it. Again, we notice this especially when we start to exercise rapidly. So when you're exercising, okay, you're consuming more energy in order to make that happen. You're going to require more oxygen to make that happen, and as a byproduct of that, you're also producing a lot more carbon dioxide. In order to accommodate for that, your body has to respond. So your heart begins to pump faster in response to make sure those cells are getting the oxygen they need, making sure it's getting rid of that carbon dioxide. And you'll also notice that your breath changes almost uncontrollably. So when you're working out, you don't have a lot of control over your breath because your body is now responding to this increase in carbon dioxide in the tissues and this need for more oxygen. And so that happens automatically as soon as you start moving around and exercising, and this is going to happen on its own. The blood then carries carbon dioxide to the lungs, and that's where it gets released. So again, we're going to zoom in. So inside your lungs, you have these alveoli. They're at the bottom branches called bronchioles, and along these alveoli, you'll see these very tiny vessels, blood vessels, which are called capillaries. And what it does is it allows for this exchange of gases here. So as that oxygen-rich blood comes, or oxygen depleted blood comes back, okay, it's going to be heavy in carbon dioxide, so the carbon dioxide is going to go in. So if I was to kind of zoom in here, let's say there's a capillary here, okay, carbon dioxide is going to want to flow into that capillary and then into the alveoli, and then oxygen is going to want to flow into there, okay? And so that's where the gas exchange happens. Then that carbon dioxide goes back out through your lungs, okay, and you breathe it out. Then you're going to take a breath in, and oxygen's going to come in, okay, fill those alveoli, okay, and then the exchange will happen all over again. So here's kind of a quick synopsis of the different types of blood vessels we looked at. So the arteries, again, their job is to take blood from the heart to all the parts of the body that need oxygen, okay. The veins bring blood back from the heart, or back to the heart, usually carrying carbon dioxide, and the capillaries are where that exchange happens. They're the tiny blood vessels, and they connect the arteries to the veins, so there's always a closed loop. Arteries tend to have thicker walls on them, and we saw that sort of in the picture before. Again, that's because they're under an extreme amount of pressure from the heart, okay? They don't contain valves because the blood is constantly being pushed away from the heart. The veins, on the other hand, are part of like the return circuit, and so they have thinner walls because they're not experiencing as much pressure. It's sort of like latent pressure of the blood as it flows back through, okay? But they do have to have these valves in order to make sure the blood doesn't flow backwards in our circulatory system. And capillaries are very small, usually only 1 cell thick, to accommodate for that diffusion. The other thing I want to talk about is what's your blood made of. So we already talked a little bit about red blood cells and what they look like and what their job is. Their job is to carry oxygen to our cells and carry carbon dioxide away from our cells. There's other parts to our blood that we need to talk about. There's your white blood cells. Okay, so they're sort of like patrolling and they're part of your immune system, but they're traveling through your blood and looking for things that may not supposed to be there. Okay, there's also your platelets. So when someone gets cut, for instance, you bleed for a little bit, but then the bleeding stops, and that bleeding doesn't stop by accident. It happens because these platelets sort of attach themselves to the surface of where that cut is. Okay, as long as the cut isn't too big, those platelets can block it up. Okay, and you'll start to get the coagulation of blood, so the blood will start to thicken and harden. Okay, and that will stop the bleeding. Okay, and this kind of brings us to a couple of problems. There is a genetic mutation where people can't clot their blood, okay, and so they can possibly die even from just like bumping their leg on a table, because that bruise would never actually heal, it would never clot, and so the blood would just keep pooling. Or if they cut their finger, they got a paper cut, they could actually die from that paper cut because their blood would never actually clot, and so you wouldn't be able to stop the bleeding. You would just bleed from the paper clip. The opposite problem can happen too. So, for instance, my dad has a disease where his blood actually clots too well, and so he can actually he has to take blood thinners in order to avoid a blood clot that shouldn't happen. And he always has to be careful not to sit or lay too long, because then his blood can actually clot on its own. So he takes a specific medication to make sure that doesn't happen. It can be problematic because if he ever had to have like a surgery or he got in like a car accident or something, again his blood is sort of the ability to clot is being suppressed, so he would kind of run into trouble. So that's the circulatory system in a nutshell. If you have questions about this week's work or this week's lab, please feel free to contact me. You can always email me. If you need a phone call, you can send me an email and say, hey, Mr. Hand, can you call me at my house tonight? I'll call and talk to your parents first and then ask to speak to you, and we can work through any of the questions you might have. Hopefully this week's lesson is interesting, and again, if you have any problems, please feel free to contact me.